Henderson.
If the Greens win the balance of power in the Senate, what effect will this have on whether the new government's promises will actually be delivered?
Let's hear from Waleed first. We haven't heard from you for a little while. The Greens have just cut a...
I don't have to deal with the Greens. It's not really, I mean...
No, but you're a political analyst, yes. So we'd like you to analyse this.
Fair enough.
You don't get out of it there.
Well, one thing I would say about the prospect of the Greens winning the balance of power, particularly if Labor wins the election, is it's going to be very interesting times for the coalition, who jumped to the ETS on the basis that this was too radical. They may well find themselves in a position where Labor is forced to negotiate with the Greens, whose position on climate change is even more radical than the idea of an ETS. And so through its political manoeuvring, the coalition would have engineered a situation where Australia has a more radical climate change policy than it was prepared to accept. And I think that is an outcome that should have been clearly contemplated at the time by the coalition. I'd be interested, Julie, in knowing whether or not you did, but I suspect it perhaps wasn't, because it seems to me that this could plainly be the result. One of the reasons that Labor did not negotiate with the Greens on the ETS this time was because they didn't have sufficient numbers. They could have got an agreement with the Greens on a package and they probably would have fallen one senator short. That won't be the case if they win the balance of power, and I think they're almost certain to win the balance of power, whoever forms government. Will the government be able to get things through if the Greens are there? Yes, that will happen. It's very rare that you would have a government having a majority in both houses, and when they do, it's a disaster, and it's ultimately what caused John Howard's demise, in my opinion, was he had too much power and ended up essentially snookering himself. So I don't think it's going to stop the business of government. They will probably find they have a Senate that's a little easier to negotiate with than the current one, or the one that they did have until the House of Reps was dissolved.
Let's go to Bruce Hawker. You've cut a deal, evidently, a preference deal with the Greens today. How significant is that, and are you thinking about the possible outcome of that deal, as we've just been discussing?
Well, Labor hasn't controlled the Senate since I don't remember when, so we've always had to deal with a hostile Senate. We've had to deal with it through the course of this government, and it's been very difficult. We would have an ETS today if the Greens and the Liberal Party had have come together and supported us. So that's a problem we have to deal with constantly. I don't see it as being a huge issue. We traditionally get about 80% of Green preferences, so I don't know that the actual act of handing out a how to vote card has all that much difference. It might have some effect in some seats.
Stephen Fielding, who got into the Senate on Labor preferences, probably disagrees with you. In fact, he put out a press conference today talking about this grubby deal between Labor and the Greens.
Yeah, he didn't do that in 2011 or 2004, whenever the last one was. Look,
presumably you were happy to see him there.
Well, the Victorian branch of the Labor Party was, and of course, you know, we've come to have to go through difficult negotiations with him. But really, this isn't particularly new or different.
No, but essentially it does seal the notion that a vote for Green is a vote for Labor.
Well, it's a vote that people have to make a decision on when they decide where their second preference is going to go.
80%, as you say, 80% of those Green preferences in the last election bled to Labor.
That's right.
So, you know, 80% of those votes will be essentially the people who think they're voting Green for whatever reason, maybe a protest, maybe over the sacking of Kevin Rudd or the assassination of Kevin Rudd, will actually be wind up voting for Labor.
But that's their choice, though.
But I actually think it's worse than this. I think that the dynamics concerning the Greens changed today. They did a preference deal with Labor before Labor had even put out its climate change policy. What credibility do the Greens now have as an independent party?
Well,
they've now become a faction of the Labor Party, and they are irrelevant in this debate now because they've said that the preference deal means that a vote for the Greens is a vote for Labor. Therefore, the Greens are a faction of the Labor Party. They are irrelevant in this campaign.
Right. Hold on, the original questioner would like to come back in with his right to reply.
I'm just curious about what would happen if the coalition won and the Greens still had the balance of power. Would Tony Abbott and Bob Brown be able to agree on anything at all?
Well, we're the only ones with a climate change and environmental policy on the table at present, and I'm sure that Bob Brown would support our Green Army.
I think that climate change is crap. That's what Tony Abbott said.
I think that
And maybe Tony Abbott might have thought about that before he said those words if he was going to do a deal with the Greens. I think the Greens would agree with a number of our
policies on renewable energy, on our plans for carbon sequestration, on our plans for a green army. I think there are a whole range of things that the Greens would support us on.
I'll just quickly, Tanya Plibersek, on this subject, I'd like to sort of move on, but I'd like to hear you on this because your seat was under threat from Greens. Is it no longer under threat?
Oh, no, I would never take my seat for granted. Both the Greens and the Liberals have a strong vote in the seat of Sydney, and I work very hard to make sure that I have a stronger vote.
Does this deal change things for you?
No, I think the Greens will campaign very hard against me in my seat this election, and I think the Liberals will campaign very hard against me too. I don't think it'll make any difference to my experience on the ground.